Welcome to the BYU Tech Transfer Podcast. I'm here with Reid Tileston, and he is an adjunct professor teaching on acquisition, entrepreneurship through acquisition. We'll talk about that a little bit. But Reid, you want to introduce yourself? You have a really interesting background.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, thanks for inviting me. Super happy to be here. Fascinating factor on me is I was born in Northern California, and my parents met at the starting line of a running race. My mom went up to my dad and his first cousin and asked them for Vaseline because they were lubing up to avoid skin chafing. Yeah. So at my core, I'm an endurance athlete from Northern California. Then I went to UC Berkeley for my undergrad, worked in finance for a short amount of time, managed to work hard, save up about $100,000. Okay. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do at that point. I'm not a software engineer. I wasn't going to go out and found the next Google. So nevertheless, I went out and I bought into some fitness franchises. So I was a multi-unit, anytime fitness owner operator for 6 years. And after that,
were you starting from scratch? Did you build the facilities, or were you acquiring them from someone?
Great question. So built them from scratch. So I think about it as acquiring a license, right? Acquiring the franchise rights, then building them from the ground up.
Okay, you must have done this in your early 20s, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 23 years old, actually.
Okay, and you went through the whole franchise process and you got all set up, huh?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I interrupted your flow there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely all good. So did that, and then I had a couple clubs, and they're doing pretty well. Mm-hmm. I wanted to meet more people, travel a little bit. So what do you think I did?
So you sold those, and then started looking for the next thing.
So I sold all except one of them. Right?
Okay.
I kept the one that had the best manager in the best market, and she was great. She said, "Reid, as long as you are going to own the business, I am happily to run the business, and I just want the cash register to ring for you every single month." I mean, I call individuals like that entrepreneurial employees, and they are, to me, the absolute best part about small business ownership and entrepreneurship through acquisition. I mean, life is about the people you meet and the relationship you cultivate along the way. Some of the most special ones for me have come from people I've had the pleasure of having work for me over the years.
And do you feel like you discovered him, or did he kind of learn from what you were doing and become that? How did that happen?
Yeah, so she actually discovered me. Amazingly, I was at a coffee shop in this small town, and this town is about 7,000 people in Northern California. One thing about Anytime Fitness is that the recipe for success, it is really simple. At least it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Find a market, 5,000 people, 10,000, 20,000 with limited competition.
Okay.
And you're going to be able to make $10,000 to $15,000 a month in adjusted EBITDA or cash flow. So I was at a coffee shop in this fantastic market. Mm-hmm. And I was actually sitting in my laptop listening to the conversations of people in the city, because I'm very on the ground when I was doing diligence for these things. Mm-hmm. And I had a wrapped cart this time that said Anytime Fitness on it. Okay. And this lady literally walks up as I'm typing. I'm actually doing budgeting for tenant improvements for the club, rubber flooring, carpets, and plumbing fixtures and things like that. So I'm typing here, and all of a sudden, I'm going to touch her arm for a second. She comes up, she's like, "Are you the guy that's opening up the fitness center in town?" Okay. And I said, "Yeah, we're looking at doing it. We have to go in front of the planning commission to get some, approvals, but that's a game plan." She's like, "I want to be your first member, so let me know immediately when you're taking signups. I want to be the first member." Well, and that relationship led to her running the club for the better part of the 12 years that I owned that. And we still are very good friends to this day. Wow. So if there's one key takeaway from entrepreneurship through acquisition and business ownership, the people that you meet along the way are what will make it a truly enriching process. And I've been lucky. I'm certainly talking about one now. I've had others too. Mm-hmm. Even just when you've been so fulfilling. Yeah,
and Reid, when you're looking for a business to acquire, is that part of it? Are you on the ground meeting with people, making judgments about whether you have a person like her?
Well, if the seller lets me, if the seller lets me meet the people, I want to get to know them as quickly as possible. When I bought an industrial services business, I got everyone's HR files, right? I mean, that's a starting point. I'd read all the quote unquote performance reviews or whatever term you want to use over the last, however long they've been there. That's where the process starts. The process goes farther than that, though, because I want to know everything I possibly can about them. I want to know their address. I want to know where they live. I'll look at their credit histories, their life story, everything. Mm-hmm. I want to know as much as I possibly can. so that before I actually meet them, I am well prepared and I have a good picture of what their life is like. Because small businesses, at the end of the day, it's people and it's processes, kind of quoting Gino Wickman with that one. But the people part of it is critical. So I want to be very thorough about that with the diligence.
Okay. And I actually think for small business owners, this is a pretty common attitude. Like, people underestimate how much business owners care about the people that work for them. You're thinking, okay, these people have kids. I need to make sure we make payroll this month. That sort of thought process, right?
Yeah, that is for me. And ultimately, I think that people are both the biggest pleasure of small business and also the biggest.
Yeah, there can be some problems.
As well.
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to be a part of a number of business owner or CEO peer groups. And we get together and we do our confidential, business operator forums, right? And what I can tell you is the most common theme by a long shot, which I would say underscores 80% of the issues that other business owners and CEOs bring up relates to people challenges.
Okay.
So people challenges are certainly something important to consider. And when you think about buying a business, ultimately, you want to be able to understand who the key people in the business are, what their roles are, and think about your role in the business as well. Because if you're buying a business where the owner, is having some kind of hands-on role in the business, you have to ask yourself, okay, how am I going to not just do what the owner is doing, and does that align to my skill sets, what I have now, and ultimately what I want to do? That's important and critical, but you also want to look at what the other people in the business are doing, what roles they have, and how that dynamic is really going to either stay the same or get adjusted as you go in there, as well. Because what I find is that a lot of very successful businesses are attractive acquisition targets. Ultimately, those businesses really grew because there was oftentimes just a single, and again, I'll use the term entrepreneurial employee, that took essentially ownership of the business.
That's super interesting.
Made it their life, not just for 1 year, not just for 5 years, but oftentimes for like 15, 20, 25 plus years, where they got deep in the operations, did a lot of the challenging stuff, and that freed up the owner to do those, we'll call them the Stephen Covey quadrant 2 activities, right? The things that are important but not urgent, whether it be strategic acquisitions, right? Whether it be investing in technology, investing in hiring the right people. Oftentimes at the growth phase of these businesses, they were able to do that because they had, oftentimes one, sometimes more, but oftentimes just one key team member that really took the operations on their back. And oftentimes business owners will sell to that team member if it makes sense. But sometimes that team member is just they're not an owner, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah,
They don't want to be the owner, or frankly, they just don't have the financial wherewithal to do it. So there's a lot of interesting things there. But again, one key takeaway from this podcast should be the importance of people when it comes to these small businesses.
So many of our technologies are going to be licensed by entrepreneurs who are building something from scratch. It's just a brand new startup. So not through acquisition, they're acquiring the technology, but not a going concern. So for them, if they're thinking about the long term, they could take the same sort of attitude, right? And think, okay, if I have a partner starting this business or whoever my initial players are these people who will stick with it long term if I decide to go off and do something else?
Yeah, absolutely. Because ultimately, as a business owner, ideally you want to make yourself as redundant as possible, and that comes through the people. Other thing too is that everyone talks about ownership and equity and the right incentives for everything. I think it's critical to understand what actually drives individuals, and it's not always money. There's other factors there as well, and I can't emphasize enough that these relationships, they're just that. They are personal relationships that can transcend numbers oftentimes. I think that that's something that's important to realize in any aspect of business, but certainly in small businesses, whether it be a Main Street business, picking up trash, or whether it be a technology startup that has, someone bought the licenses for some technology and is looking to, scale it fast growth.
Okay. Well, that's great. And in case people aren't aware, and you're working on a PhD right now in economics, right?
On entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Through acquisition. And so you have another degree in economics though, right? Okay. So
UC Berkeley, go Bears.
Okay, there you go, for Berkeley. And then, so some people might not be aware that there's a lot of economic research showing that people don't act primarily for financial motives. You assume that what employees want is to maximize their money, but that's often not the case, right?
Yeah, correct. And let's be clear, particularly with, we'll say lower wage employees, the money has to be there or they can pay the bills and they can knock all that stuff out. But oftentimes, the marginal utility flattens out and it can go downwards as well. sometimes if you think, and I can talk about this in my own personal experience shares, I think that more money will motivate people. I've actually had it be the case where giving them more money or offering them more money, all that did is it tapped into their extrinsic value at the expense of their intrinsic motivation. So what would have happened is that they're like, no, I would have gone above and beyond to hit these numbers or to service that customer or to, just be a stellar team member. I would do that because I want to do that. I inspired to do that. I have generative drive to do that. If you're going to, offer me 5, 10, whatever the number is, a couple $1,000 to do it, I'm not doing it for the money. It only actually, I find that offensive, quite frankly, that you think I'm only money motivated. So it's very interesting. And the key takeaway, though, for the listeners is that it's a person by person, case by case situation. And that's where that relationship cultivation becomes critical.
Great. Yeah. So I think Dan Ariely talks about that, actually accidentally converting intrinsic motivation to extrinsic motivation. And then Clayton Christensen, I think, says, yeah, you need a certain level of, or he's written a certain level of income to be kind of a hygiene factor in a job. But beyond that, you get into these other issues. So, okay, fantastic. So, yeah, you sold off most of your franchises or your locations, and then you want to travel more. What happened next?
Oh, I went to Chicago Booth for business school.
There you go.
California, I think, is the most innovative state in the country in a variety of ways. One way it's really innovative, and I say this in that I was successful in California, so I don't say this from like an bitter standpoint, but it's also very innovative at making it difficult to run Main Street businesses. So I was ready to, I was ready to leave California and try something new. So I chose the great state of Illinois. And when I got to Chicago Booth, again, I got really lucky. Booth was just then starting to think about launching an entrepreneurship through acquisition program there.
Okay.
And I arrived as a student who'd run these, Main Street fitness centers for the better part of 6 years. And so I was able to get involved in that. I ran the first ETA student group at Chicago Booth. I got to plan. I shouldn't say the first. There was a group there, but it wasn't too well organized, so we really walled it up. Okay. I got to help plan the first ETA conference at Booth, and most importantly, I got to be the TA.
Well, didn't you create the curriculum? That's what they're saying online.
Yeah, I had. So then the best part is that after the conference, conference we were getting together, but then I got to be the teaching assistant for the first ever course on ETA at Chicago Booth, where there was 2 adjuncts that taught it. And then TA. So I got to help build that curriculum from the ground up, which turned into an absolutely transformational experience for me. Because Dave, it literally took us all like 40 hours a week minimum to do that. Yeah. It gave me a lot more respect, quite frankly, for professors and teachers, because I'm like, whoa, like building this stuff is a lot of work. Having like the cases, I didn't even organize the logistics of the guests coming in. Having all these like great questions from these high caliber booth students. Having the great assignments, having to think about what assignments to create. I mean, it was a ton of work.
Would that be, it must have been pretty unusual. Like, how many universities have entrepreneurship through acquisition programs?
At that point, this is now the spring of 2015 when the course launched. I think at that point, Stanford had one, Harvard had one. I don't know that any other universities actually had it at that point. So it was a very small sample set. Since that time, it is absolutely mushroomed. And by the way, the first year we were involved in that class, it was ranked 3rd highest at Chicago Booth.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it got excellent. Immediately popular because it just makes, because of the curriculum is so pragmatic for students. Yeah. And that's why it's still highly popular at a lot of MBA programs to this day.
Yeah. And so one theory I have on that, so I did my MBA here at BYU. And Tom Peterson was, pretty early on the curve here doing the same sort of course, right? And it is offered here at BYU. And you're probably teaching it. Are you teaching it currently or speaking in it?
Yeah. Later tonight, actually.
Okay, great. So, good. So one theory is like MBAs, a lot of people go to MBA school because they want to be management in the company. Maybe they're working in a corporation, they want to move up, have more options. But many of them are interested in business, want to be entrepreneurs. And so maybe this is a way where it's like, okay, it uses kind of whatever high-end skills I have, but it's still entrepreneurship. Is that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would tell you it's absolutely entrepreneurship. And the key is that owning a business or acquiring a business can happen at any phase of your life. And there's no right time and there's no wrong time. I was able to get into it when I was 23 years old, just through the circumstances that existed. But ultimately, someone who's 50 years old, right, has a couple $100,000 is also a fantastic candidate to go through this. From an education standpoint, though, I think that the earlier that students get exposed to this career track, the better, because then you can start to think about your career and think about how this might play a role in that, whether it be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. You can say, hey, you know what? I want to go work at GE, or say we'll use a school that recruits a lot here at Marriott. I want to go work at Dell, right?
Yeah, there you go.
I want to go work at Dell for a couple years, do a rotational program, but I really want to focus on say I want to be a systems integrator, right? So I want to work at Dell with an emphasis on that. Then after that, I want to go out when I have some money in the bank and I want to acquire a systems integration company. You can think about your career track with ETA being a part of it at the time that makes the most sense for you.
Okay. And so if you're going to go that route, have a plan. This is how much money I'm setting aside each year for the thing I'm doing in 5 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, correct. And then that way you can align your finances, you can align your skill set, you can align your network. And even while and not that anyone that works at Dell needs it here, so even while you're at Dell, you can start to build the infrastructure, do an acquisition, right? Let's say that you're living in Austin, okay? So you want to acquire a business in Austin. Then while you're still at Dell saving the money, be like, hey, I'm at Dell. Here's the kind of companies I'm looking for. You talk to intermediaries, start talking to business owners, lay the groundwork for it. And that's how you can be very successful going down this route.
Okay. Great. And so you started at 23 really with these franchises. So sometimes we'll have a technology that we think is really good for a student startup, and it could be like a good first entrepreneurial take for them. So, but many students are nervous. It's a little scary doing something that sounds complicated. Like a franchise is really complicated to do. I mean, they tell you how, but there are a lot of rules or whatever. What do you tell students who are just a little bit nervous, a little on the fence about doing a startup?
Yeah, what I tell them is that the key to doing it is that one, failure is a building block for your success, right? So just do not fear failure. Some of the most successful people in the world have lots of failure before success comes, Abraham Lincoln being one of them. Sure. Secondly is as you're thinking about minimizing risk, the way that you can do that is potentially, as opposed to doing a traditional startup, simply acquire something that already works, right?
Yeah.
When you're doing a franchise, you're acquiring a system and a process that's been, for the most part, tried and true. So that's a starting point. Secondly, is just go super deep in diligence. Be like one level thorough, then be a second level thorough, and then go even deeper than that. So for example, if you want to buy a franchise, I give people as coaching consistently. Franchising is great because all the information is public.
Sure.
You can go online at certain states and you can reach out to me. I'll tell you which ones, where you can find all the franchise disclosure documents for every single franchise. And on those lists, you can see the list of every single franchise owner. And what I do, I call down until I've talked to at least 10 franchise owners, because I want to talk to the happy ones. I want to talk to the ones that are not happy. And I really, really, really want to talk to the ones that are pissed off, that are not doing well, that made some big time mistakes, like talking to someone like me in my first fitness club, right? Where I was a mediocre first performer, but that's where I really learned. So we're talking about franchising in particular, but just be so thorough in diligence. If you're super thorough in diligence, every step that you're doing, you are minimizing your risk. You're minimizing your risk. And, private equity firms are fantastic. What they're so good at is just minimizing risk at every bit in the process. And the second way, or the second theme, I'd say, of risk minimization is that critical to go all in, right? My belief is that if you're not all into this path, you're in the way. And going all in is a form of risk mitigation, because now you're focused on a single thing, because ultimately the most important commodity in life is time. Yeah. If you're spread an inch deep, a mile wide, you just can't focus. If you're solely focused on one concept, one thing, one endeavor, then you're going to become an expert in that, and that's going to help you ultimately de-risk the opportunity that you're going into.
Okay. Yeah, you do see entrepreneurs who have 8 different things they're doing at once, and maybe spraying themselves too thin. So. Good. Well, you did another couple of franchises that I thought were pretty interesting. So you got your MBA there. Right after that, did you jump into other opportunities, other businesses?
I started searching for a business to buy.
Yeah, because I noticed you had Sandbox VR.
Yeah.
Which I have been a customer of the business.
Nice.
How did you get involved with them? And this is like a VR place where you go and they have the room, it's multi-person, you all have your gear on and you're doing stuff in virtual reality.
Yeah. So Sandbox is a very interesting story. So Sandbox wanted to essentially grow through franchising.
Okay.
And because I've been doing franchising for so long, which goes to the point of having a good, solid, focused brand on franchising, ETA, Main Street businesses, is that someone in my network knew that I knew a lot about franchising, and he knew the founders of Sandbox, and he made the connection.
Okay.
So essentially, that's how I got involved in Sandbox. And Sandbox now, they have a number of corporate-owned stores. We also have a number of franchise stores as well, and at very strong global footprint. They are now pretty reasonably aggressively franchising for locations in the U.S. So if anyone has a passion for virtual reality, a little bit of money to invest, Sandbox is very viable for that.
Can you say how much money would it cost someone to start up?
Sandbox is reasonably high. It's probably going to be about $500,000 or $750,000 of actual liquid capital to get going. Plus, you have to have a little bit more net worth to be able to back it up and everything.
Okay, so they'll have some requirement for net worth, but it's just going to cost you $500,000. There's all this equipment, franchise fees, stuff like that.
Yeah, and it all depends how you want to do it. You can do more equity, you can finance some of the stuff, all that good stuff there. So
yeah, it seems like for a lot of people, gyms are a less expensive franchise to start. Is that the case, or what's the kind of best deal signs starting out?
The fitness industry is interesting because there's a ton of franchise opportunities there. I mean, there are a ton. Fitness is interesting because the demand drivers of fitness are very strong. You have an aging population, right? You have your demographic tailwinds. You also have people just want to live healthy, right? They want to be healthier. So there's a lot of demand on the fitness side. There's also a ton of supply, right? It is a very, very, very competitive space. And there's a lot of very sophisticated operators in the space as well. A lot of private equity money, and not just private equity money on the franchisor side, but a lot of the big tier franchises, one being Planet Fitness, another being Orange Theory, private equity firms actually own a lot of those franchise locations. So anyone thinking about getting into the fitness space, I'd be very wary of doing it based on how competitive the marketplace is.
It's just developed that way.
Yeah, so it's very competitive. Now, there's still niches to get there, and the demand tailwinds are very strong, but given also the economics of high fixed costs, low variable costs, typically can be very tough to compete in that space. Now, with that said, some of the concepts are going to be very high cost because you have to finance that equipment. Other ones are going to be very low cost. Like you can get in to do various.
There are CrossFits where it's this tiny space and they're doing classes.
Or personal training studios who are doing that stuff. So there can be low barriers, there can be high barriers. Let me ask you though, with those low barrier, classes and those CrossFits, what's the challenge with that if you were to get into it ultimately?
Well, it's very time consuming, so you're gonna have to find the right trainers for it. The actual price point for customers is pretty high, so maybe that's a smaller segment of the demand.
Those are all great points, and because it was so easy for you to get into it, it's low cost.
Oh, okay.
It's also easy for me to get into it as well. And now we have two rival CrossFit places right across from each other.
Yeah, you do.
We one day you're like, I'm going to drop prices by $1. Next day I say, you know what, I'm dropping prices by $2. So you can get very challenging price wars in those situations as well, because people can come, people can go. The other fascinating fact about fitness too, which I think some people don't always appreciate, is that a lot of people will get into the fitness space because going to Intrinsic Motivation. They just want to help people get in shape.
Yeah, it just seems fun.
Yeah, and also they might have a very compelling story that they lost, 80 pounds 5 years ago, completely changed their life. Do you think those individuals are very motivated by profit?
No, I mean, it's if you have two motivations, you have to choose sometimes. At some point, you're going to have to choose which one's more important, right?
Yeah, and ultimately, a lot of those operators will be happy to go into it just enough to pay the bills. And this might sound crazy, but I have the personal experience here to back this up. There's also people I know in the fitness space. You would not know this at all if you knew what concepts they were, but they actually are losing money, right, with their concepts. But they don't mind because they might, they could have had external wealth, could have a wealthy partner. They are operating their businesses at a loss because they feel so intrinsically motivated. Oh, I wanted to help people. And I can't say that exists in a lot of other industries, but I can certainly tell you that it's not the rule, but there are people out there that do that. So going to fitness there's, I think, a lot of layers you should be analyzed as you think through it.
Okay. So if you take, and that's super helpful and interesting, if you take the lessons you've learned from franchising these types of businesses, if you were a student or any entrepreneur licensing a raw technology out of a university, and this is what we do in tech transfer, how does that play out? What would your approach be, or what would look like a good opportunity to you?
What would look like a good opportunity to me would be one where you have a unique knowledge, or you want someone on your team has a unique knowledge where demand for your product is essentially guaranteed, where there's no question about it whatsoever, that if you have this technology, you have technology as is, and maybe you can tweak it a little bit to have it make sense, but you know who the customer avatar is.
Yeah.
What is a big reason, if not the most important reason that startups fail?
No clear concept of the customer, I assume.
Yeah. No clear concept of the customer, not knowing who the avatar is. So I have a very clear picture of that. And if you can explain to someone like me, so let's say that I was an investor, about, hey, here's who my target customer is, here's the product that I'm building for it, and here's a match. That's so simple that it can be explained to a peon brain like me, or it can be explained to your golden retriever or your 5-year-old niece. Be crystal clear on who the customer is and how this technology is actually going to help them right now. Not in 10 years, not in 5 years based on 9 contingencies, but how is it going to help them pragmatically right now?
Okay, so what's a hypothetical example of, say, a fictional technology that would kind of fit the bill for you?
Yeah, great question. I'll talk about a really dirty thing, and that's grease traps, right?
Oh, yeah.
I owned a business that did about 35% of grease trap pumping, okay? Now, we have no idea what is actually going on in a grease trap until we open it. So there was a technology that could basically say, okay, this grease trap needs to come up for servicing, right? And because of the level of the grease relative to the water in it, right? Simple measurement like that. It'll be insanely valuable, because what happens is good restaurant operators will say, I need to get my grease trap pumped every 3 months, right? Not so good ones will wait till it overflows if there's no regulations, right?
Yeah.
And regulators are trying to figure out, well, should I make them pump it monthly, quarterly, annually? I don't know exactly. If there was a technology tool that integrated grease trap pumpers with restaurant owners, with regulators on an app, that would be amazing. And it would say that, hey, this trap needs to be serviced in the next 7 days. It would solve 28 million problems. That's on the grease trap side. I could tell you that a similar concept, which is out in the marketplace now, and I don't know if they're gaining, I haven't kept up with them as of like the last, year per se, but they're doing that same thing in the also sexy area of septic tanks, right?
Okay.
So they're actually measuring, putting a float in a septic tank, so they know when it needs to be serviced. And this might sound really basic, like, are you telling me, Reid, that there's not already floats in these septic tanks that are sending out, IoT level readings out there? I would tell you, no, there's not.
People assume that technologies have developed the way they should have, but they haven't in most cases.
And let's be clear, if you're talking about, like a hospital here at BYU Intermountain Health, they very well might have, a float and a sensor in there. But if you're talking about the 20,000 homes around this area, they're probably not, right? And that's a huge area to potentially fill. And it works because as an operator, I'd be like, oh, this is fantastic. Because now I know I can do better routing. I can service my customers better. The customer is going to love it because, wow, now as opposed to wondering, I actually know. So I know I'm not overpaying for too many services, and I know that that my grease trap's not going to overflow on a Friday, what was last night? Wednesday night on Valentine's Day, when Dave and his wife are coming out, they don't want to smell out overload grease trap. Everyone's going to know. Everyone's going to be made better off. And if I'm an operator in the space and that technology comes my way, and it actually works, I'm going to jump on it in a second. So that would be a very pragmatic, Main Street, dirty business kind of example.
And that's a pretty realistic example we have of something that can actually exist. We have a software technology for calibrating gas station tanks, the underground tanks, and the pumps. And so that makes the Environmental Protection Agency happy. It makes gas stations happy because they don't get overcharged or undercharged, And also there are penalties for dispensing too much or too little fuel, if your pumps are not calibrated correctly.
Oh, it's interesting.
Anyway, so this is a closed system. And again, people think, oh, that must exist already. They must have sensors or something. But no, when the government wants to calibrate those tanks, they come by with a 50-gallon bucket and fill it up. It's like the same way they've been doing it for 70 years or something. And so in so many industries, there are technologies here. And what's special about the one you mentioned and this one also is there's government regulation behind it. Like, there's demand because the government, like law enforcement, says there's demand, right?
Yeah.
So not always the case, but that's a good source of demand for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Non-technologically, but an interesting experience here is that I know an individual, an entrepreneur that is going off of government demand in a really unique way. And that is that there's an area in the state of Tennessee where 18-wheeler big rigs cannot park on the side of the freeway, right? Like on the on-ramps, they can't park there. And the state enforces it. So here's my intuition. This is what there's truck stops for, right?
Yeah.
Big rigs park in truck stops, so they park at, rest stations and things like that, right? I mean, that's like my assumption. There'd be no business there at all.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out the case is that because of the rules that truck drivers, can't drive more than like 10 hours, there's actually like a gap of where there's truck stops and rest stops, so much so that this individual can basically open a truck parking lot and charge truckers like $40 to park there overnight
Parking lot.
and make money.
Wow.
You could, I would have, I don't bet it all to be crystal clear, but I might have bet $1 million that there's no demand for that.
Yeah.
For like truck parking, given all the truck stops that exist. I can also tell you there's somebody who's making good money off of that right now.
Wow.
Off of that demand, which is of course driven by the government, because the government goes by and says, trucker, you can't park there. And if you do, here's a ticket for $300. And they're like, oh, I can't do that. So they have to go pay to have to parking.
And I'm guessing the founder in that case probably knew some truck drivers or heard someone grumbling about it, right? Like, you're just on the ground talking to normal people. And so that's one other thing I wanted to emphasize.
I believe he owned a moving company.
Oh, okay.
So we kind of got involved in that.
Was connected with people there.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that you kind of alluded to a little bit when we were talking about grease traps there, that you've been kind of on the ground with your businesses too. Like when you get the business, you're out there doing the frontline work so that you can see the opportunities, right?
And it's so much fun that way too. Yeah. It is so much fun. And that's how I can build culture. And ultimately, I think that, it's how I can build culture. It's how I can have fun. I just think it's a great way to run a business. Just my personal preference, so you don't have to. Also, just practically, that's where you, to your point, find the opportunities, right? Yeah. That's where you can actually talk to the customers, see what the technicians are doing, see if there's a better way to do it. And that's where there's so much unique innovation. And you cannot find that sitting behind the door. I'm a big believer of the saying, if you live by the door, you're going to die by the door.
Yeah. You'll be out of it soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So just generally, like entrepreneurship by acquisition, you're thinking about buying existing companies. Do you consider tech transfer part of that, or is this a different process?
No, I mean, I think that they're in the same way that I think about it, the same way I think about franchising. Actually, like entrepreneurship through acquisition at its core is buying an existing business that's profitable, consistent, making a lot of money. On the flip side, buying a franchise and building it from the ground up doesn't quite fit that ETA criteria, but it is like also viable because you're buying an existing license that works and then you're building it from the ground up. It's the same thing with technology transfer, right? You're buying technology that works. You're already buying something that exists as opposed to building it from scratch. And then you're just doing some nuances about, hey, how can I make the market fit work? How can I potentially tweak it a little bit?
Yeah.
All these things are the high level form of lower risk entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to starting out and building something all from scratch. And you're talking to the individual that loves challenges. Like I love
literally. Yeah.
Doing these routes is actually an easier route to being an entrepreneur and being a business owner than is to build something from the ground up. And I would tell you, just one individual's opinion, that you are still a business owner, you're still an entrepreneur. There's no fundamental difference whether you're buying something and building it or you're building something directly from the ground up, except that you're lowering your risk profile when you're buying it, right? Yep. And secondly, you're lowering your risk profile and you're maximizing your chances of success.
Yeah. Well, so that's great. And amazingly, we're just about out of time. Like, Reid, you've been so interesting to talk to. So you didn't mention that before the interview, but I noticed you have a book coming out in a few months, though. Do you want to talk about that for just 2 seconds?
Yeah. Just go to grititdone.com if you want to pre-order it and check it out. But ultimately, I do. People reach out to me to have conversations a lot about ETA and buying a business and this and that. Mm-hmm. What I find is that people are at various phases of the process. Some are actually pretty deep, and it's a good use of time. Others just really early in the process don't quite know how to take advantage of the time. So I said, you know what? I'm going to write a book, which is the first starting point. So spend a couple bucks, spend 3 hours. You'll learn everything that I think is important to know over my 16 years of doing this, and check it out and go from there. So grititdone.com.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for being here, Reid. Really appreciate your insights, and we'll be back in another week with another episode.